Christian parenting.
Welcome to the Called to Love podcast, where we discuss all things adoption and foster care and dive into the practical, the clinical, and most importantly, the biblical perspectives to help you and your family thrive. I'm Summer Colbert, adopted mom, director of adoption and foster ministry, and champion for the Arkansas Baptist Children and Family Ministries. Adoption and foster care aren't just a process. They are both unique invitations to go on a journey with the Lord, where you will experience life-changing opportunities to grow in your faith and learn to love in an entirely new way. One thing is for sure, being called to love means you will never be the same. Hey families, and welcome back to Called to Love. On this episode, I am so excited to bring you a very special conversation with a very special guest. That is none other than Dr. Gary Chapman, the best-selling author that you might know and recognize from the 5 love languages. You might also recognize my conversation with Dr. Laurel Shaler a few episodes back, where she co-authored the Loving Adopted Children Well book with Dr. Chapman, and that was based on the 5 love languages specific towards adoptive parents. But today, I want to talk to you about a book that Dr. Chapman himself released late last year called The 5 Traits of a Healthy Family. And I had the honor and privilege of speaking with him about this topic, and it was such a special conversation. You know, foster and adoptive parents are still very much parents, and foster and adoptive families are very much families. Crazy as it sounds, I can forget that sometimes because I'm so focused on the extra and the unique needs of my family. But regardless of how God designed our families, our heart and our goal should always be to be able to function as healthy families. Well, how do we do that? In today's conversation, Dr. Chapman shares insight as to how we can work together to function as a healthy family. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Dr. Chapman, 5 Traits of a Healthy Family. I am beyond excited and honored to welcome Dr. Gary Chapman to our conversation. Dr. Chapman, welcome.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you today.
It's such a pleasure to have you. You have unknowingly had a tremendous impact, certainly on my married life of almost 20 years through the resources that the Lord has used you to create. And today we're going to be talking about your latest resource, which is 5 Traits of a Healthy Family. And Dr. Chapman, what a needed topic. I mean, it just feels like there is such a lack of health in our culture when it comes to the family today. Tell me why you felt like it was time to share this particular message as we get started in our conversation today.
Well, you know, what motivated me was the fact that I have, over the last 20 years, had so many people in my office who are thinking about marriage.
Yeah.
And they say, Dr. Chapman, I do have a concern. I grew up in a very dysfunctional family.
Yeah.
And I really don't have a clear picture of even what a healthy family should look like.
Right.
And so I just felt like it was just time to write a book that would kind of picture what a healthy family looked like from a biblical perspective. What does it look like to have a healthy family? And then with practical ideas on how to build those traits into your family. So that's what motivated me. And I agree with you. I think the need is great for people to have a clear picture of what God intended family to look like.
Yes, exactly. And I love the word that you use, build, because it's not something that happens overnight. You don't just get married and it's healthy, and you don't just start a family and it's healthy. It is intentional effort on a day-to-day basis. And that's one of the things that I really want to dive into with you today. And I want to start off too by clarifying, I feel like we need to say this. When you say healthy family, you are not implying an absence of conflict or struggle, because perfect is not the goal here, or nor is a curated image of the family. And so let's start by I'm going to give you a broad question and just kind of go where you lead me on this, Dr. Chapman. When you say healthy families, what do you mean by that?
I mean, the 5 traits that I give in the book is what I mean by a healthy family. You're exactly right. I don't mean there's no conflict. 2 humans will always have conflict because we think differently, we have different histories, we have different ideas, we have different emotions. So conflict is a part of a healthy family. But in a healthy family, that conflict will be resolved by treating each other with dignity and respect and not demanding that your way is the right way. Those are the dynamics. I think that conflicts is there, but in a healthy family, we resolve conflicts in a healthy manner and not
Yeah,
in a destructive manner.
that's right. Exactly. I love that. And what have you found? And I mean, we know that there's always been, even with the first family, I mean, there was brokenness right away, right? Because of sin. And so it's not a new thing to struggle to be a healthy family. But do you find some unique challenges now for our families in our current culture that are hindrances to functioning as a healthy family?
Well, Summer, I think one issue that is new to our generation is the technology.
Sure.
And while there are many positive things about technology, for example, you and I would not be talking right now if it weren't for technology.
Right.
So I'm not anti-tech, but I do think that many times in the family, technology plays a major role that really should not be.
Yes.
And so I think parents have to be sensitive to that. In fact, I wrote a book some time ago on how do you teach social skills in a screen-driven age.
Right.
And so I think that is a factor. But I think when you go back to the fundamentals, it has to do with our human nature,
Yeah.
that we are all self-centered, and that can also lead to selfishness, where we want our way, we're into a relationship for what we can get out of it, rather than love, which is the opposite of that, that I'm in this relationship to enrich your life. So, yeah, I think that's the fundamental issue. And let's face it, the enemy does not want us to have healthy families.
That's right.
I mean, look what he did to the first family, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And he wants to do the same thing in our family. So, I think we have to recognize that this is a spiritual issue as well as a social and understanding issue as well.
I absolutely agree with that. And it is so complicated, but really, if you break it down and you think about it, a family does not begin when children enter the picture. A family begins when a man and a woman join together in covenant of marriage, right? And so that responsibility starts in that healthy relationship and building healthy relationship as a married couple. And you talk about this in the book, and I definitely want to go there next in our conversation and help our families and remind them. But because most of our audience today, Dr. Chapman, I mean, we're in the busy season of life. We're in the throes of raising our kids. And a lot of times the marriage can take a back seat in that. And so you bring in this book a healthy focus on the marriage relationship and how a husband serves a wife and how a wife is to respond to the husband. So dive into that and give us a few more details of what that looks like from a healthy family, starting with mom and dad in the covenant of marriage.
Yeah, I think the most fundamental issue in a healthy marriage is that the individuals have an attitude of service to the other person. So in the marriage, it means the husband has an attitude of, I'm here to serve you.
Right.
I'm here to enrich your life. I'm here to help you become the person you believe God wants you to be. And the wife has the same attitude toward the husband. Jesus said about himself, I did not come to be served. I came to serve and to give my life a ransom for others. He's our model. And so I think here's the good news. We choose our attitude. Every single day, we choose an attitude of love or an attitude of selfishness. And the attitude of love is I'm here to serve you. The attitude of selfishness, I'm in this relationship for what I can get out of it. You don't make me happy, I'm out of here. You will never have a healthy marriage with a selfish attitude. But the love
Yes.
attitude is an attitude of service to each other. So that starts with the mom and dad. And then, yes, it goes down to the children. And then we teach the children how to serve each other, how to serve us as they get older. And then we take it outside the family. And our family becomes a family that's serving other people. And the greatest satisfaction in life comes from investing our lives in serving other people and helping them have more meaningful lives.
Ugh, I love that so much. And you're right, because it really is an unfair expectation to place on first a spouse and then, let's be honest, children as well. There's this idea of, I want my family to look curated for the entertainment of other people or to make people have a certain impression about us. And ceases to be about relationship and that love and that service as you're talking about, and it's more about make me feel good, make me look good. And then the dysfunction ensues, which is just, and I see this so much. I had shared with you before we hit record today, and our listeners know this. I see the brokenness of family and the dysfunction and the lack of health in family all the time, working in the foster care and adoption side of things. And it's just heartbreaking, these simple practices that make such a huge difference in a child's ability to feel loved and safe and then go outside of themselves, as you're talking about, and ultimately God's purpose for us. And so, with that, I mean, let's talk about, because the whole point of functioning as a healthy family is not just to be for ourselves, but for others, as you talked about. Talk about the impact that healthy families have on communities and churches and society as a whole.
I think if we could have healthy families, it would literally transform our culture. And if
Yeah,
anyone should be taking the lead in this, it is Christian families, because the
absolutely.
non-Christian world doesn't have the same concept that Christians have about the meaning of life.
Right.
But we as Christians understand exactly what Jesus did in terms of, Peter says about Jesus, he went about doing good. And as Christian families, we go about doing good. And imagine if just the Christian families in this country had that attitude. We're here to enrich the world, and we're reaching out to serve other people. We started in the home, we take it outside the home. It would literally transform the culture. And that's what's
Yes.
heartbreaking, is that you have sometimes Christian families who don't have a healthy family, who don't have a healthy marriage, and sometimes they bail out, and then the kids end up, in your organization, people trying to take care of the children. So, and then of
Yes.
course, no question about it, the whole alcohol and drug issue in our country is just colossal. And the
Right.
Bible over and over again says, "Don't get drunk, don't get drunk, don't get drunk." You know, and every command God gave, He gave for our benefit. They flow
Right.
out of His love for us. And when we violate what God says, then it's always a detriment to our relationship and to other our impact on other people.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And to your point, that begins with a modeling of healthy respect of children and obedience and honoring their parents. And you talk about that in the book as well. Talk about the impact and how that is a display of a healthy family when you have children who honor and obey and respect their parents.
Yeah, I think that's a crucial issue. That's very, very clearly taught in the scriptures in Ephesians, that children are to obey their parents and honor their parents. And obedience has to come before honor. And I think for parents,
Mm,
that means that we have to clearly delineate that we are the parents. Children are not to be in charge of households. We have that
right.
responsibility under God. And so we have to accept that
Yes.
responsibility. So we're going to seek to teach and train our children to obey us, because the rules that we have for them also grow out of our love for them, just like
Right.
God's rules grow out of His love. And so we tell the child, here's what we do, here's what we don't do, whatever the guideline is. Now, if you break the rule, here's what happens, and that they have to suffer the consequences. And when they have to suffer
Yeah.
consequences, they learn to obey. I remember when my son was, I don't know, 10 or 11, and we had a guideline once he got a bicycle, that every night you have to put the bicycle in the shed. If you don't put it in the shed and you leave it out, you don't have privileges the next day to ride the bicycle. And he agreed to
Yeah.
that. It makes sense. Well, down the line, he left it out one night, and I said, Derek, you remember the guideline, the rule, right? You have to put it in the shed, and if you don't, you lose the privilege for the next day. And he said, well, Dad, I know that, Dad, I know that, but Dad, this afternoon, all the guys are going to be riding, and let me ride today, and then not ride tomorrow. And I said, son, I can understand how you would feel that way and how you would say that, but our guideline, our agreement was, if you don't put it in, you lose the privilege the next day. So I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Because I love you as a parent, I cannot let you not suffer the consequences. He never left it
Right.
out again, ever. If we
Yeah.
lovingly apply the consequences, then they learn to obey us. And they also learn from our model how we obey the laws that we live under. You You got your son in the back seat of the car. It's 10 o'clock at night. You're getting home from an event, and you come to a sign that says no left turn, but there's no cars anywhere. So if you
Yeah.
don't turn here, you got to drive 2 more blocks. If you turn left, you've just communicated to that child it's okay to break the law if no one's watching.
Yeah.
No, no, no. You go forward. You don't turn left. And if the child says, Dad, why didn't you turn back there? It's a lot closer. You say, Son, didn't you see the sign? It said no left turn. But Dad, there were no
Yeah.
cars. Son, we obey the law whether anyone's watching or not. So
Yeah.
our model and then our allowing them to suffer the consequences teaches them to obey us. And if we raise children who have a respect for our authority, they will respect the teacher's authority at school. One of the most
That's
common
right.
complaints I hear from school teachers is I spend half my time just trying to keep order in the classroom so I can teach
Yeah.
because they don't respect the teacher. And so we have a whole
Right.
thousands of children growing up who have no respect for authority, which sets
Right.
them up for failure. So yeah, and if we teach them to obey us, they will come to honor us because somewhere along the line, as they get older, they'll realize, oh man, I'm so glad I had parents like that, and they honor you.
Yes. Hey friends, Summer here. This podcast, Called to Love, is proudly a part of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. Christian Parenting's mission is to equip parents with the tools that they need to confidently raise the next generation of culture-changing Christians. And right now, that feels more important than ever. Wouldn't you agree? We would love for you to join us in this crucial mission by joining our community of monthly donors. Monthly donations are essential to ministries like Christian Parenting because they help to plan well for the year ahead and create the best content possible. Content like this podcast, printed products, digital guides, and online articles. Your recurring gift, whether $5, $10, $25, or even $50 a month, will help Christian Parenting reach even more parents around the world, encouraging them to be the perfectly imperfect parents God created them to be. To set up your recurring gift, you can go to cpgive.org. That's cpgive.org. Thank you so much for your ongoing support and partnership. Now let's get back to the conversation. Yes, absolutely. And what I love about that example that you gave was how calm you were, but how firm you were. And this idea of not repeating it over and over again, not elevating, not raising your voice. It's just very matter of fact, and it becomes very conversational and very intentional, but very to the point where your children understand that line of authority where you're talking about it. And I think we've lost that in a culture of the children ruling the household, as you're talking about, or feeling the need to explain to it in such a way where really we have to establish authority in that healthy way, and there is a healthy way to establish that authority, and that's a really really great example that you give in all of that. I want to ask you, because you're absolutely right, our children are sitting in classrooms where the children are not respecting authority, and so there is this component of negative influence that our children are exposed to and that we as families are exposed to, and different families that have different boundaries and different um, guidelines and expectations that we try to establish in our homes. What advice do you have for us as Christian parents as a response to those inevitable unhealthy influences that we see all around us?
Well, I think for one thing, when our children say to us, "Well, everybody in my room has one," or
Yeah.
and it's something you've said you're not going to give them right now, and you say, "Well,
Right.
honey, I'm not the parent. I'm not the father. I'm not the mother of everybody in your classroom. I'm your mother.
Right.
I'm your father, and I have to do what I believe is best for you. I love you too much to do something that I don't think is good for you. So I'm not going to give you
That's
that
right.
gift now. The time will come when I will give you that gift." So I think again,
Yeah.
it's explaining and to say to the child, I can understand why you would want one if everybody else in your room has one. I can understand that, but I love you too much to do something I don't think is good for you. So if they
Yeah.
can understand that our allowing them to suffer consequences uh, is because we love them and we love them too much not to let them suffer consequences, they begin to get
Right.
the picture.
Yes. I agree with that, and doing so with consistency. As you're sharing with us, I want to ask this question, and I do this often because we come into these conversations really trying to discuss the optimal. And certainly today, like we all want to walk away from this conversation saying that we have healthy families. But the reality is, a lot of our listeners are listening to you and they're saying, "Gosh, Dr. Chapman, we're just not in a place right now where we're operating as a healthy family," and their hearts are so much to be in that place, but they might have gone down a certain path or established a number of habits and rhythms in their home where they just don't feel like it's possible to even correct the course. And so, what advice would you have for those listeners right now where they're like, I'd love to be where what you're describing is true for our family, but I just don't know where to start?
Well, that's really why I wrote the book, is because I wanted to give them some practical help on how to begin to make changes. So what I
Yeah.
suggest is, if both parents are willing, why don't we just read a chapter a week in this book and then ask
Yeah.
ourselves, what can we learn from this chapter? And just begin to make incremental changes. You don't just one day say, oh, we're going to be a healthy family. No, no, no. It's step by step by step. And so you work on these 5 traits that I give one at a time. And ideally, obviously, is that both the husband and the wife are working together on this. Now, it's much more difficult, obviously, if your spouse is not willing to, look at material and discuss it with you. Much more difficult. But you as one can ask yourself, well, what can I learn from this, and how might I do something differently from what I've been doing? And if your
Yeah.
spouse sees you beginning to make changes yourself, they may begin to think, "Ooh, well, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe I should be doing that." So we can't make our spouse change, but we can influence our spouse. Sometimes we just give up because they say, "Well, my husband or my wife won't read a book with me, so therefore they won't go to a conference," and da 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 da. Well,
Right.
don't give up. You have an influence on your spouse every single day. It's either a negative influence or a positive influence. So make the
That's a good
decision
word.
with God's help that you're going to have a positive influence on your spouse by the way you behave.
I love that. I have to tell you a little bit of personal testimony just quickly. This was definitely true for me in my marriage with my husband, and going back to the 5 love languages within the first 5 years of our marriage, and we just very much had a pace of I tend to be the stronger personality, and he tends to just, go along with the flow and not even express his voice when he really had an opinion on the matter. And after attending one of your conferences and diving into what that looked like, I started to feel that personal conviction that led to a conversation of vulnerability, saying, "Hey, I realize that I'm doing this to you and I'm so sorry," and taking steps forward. And that empowered him to step up and lead more in our home and with our kids. And here we are almost 20 years into marriage, and we've seen the fruit of that. And so I share all that to say that's a personal testimony of mine to affirm what you just shared with us, is that incremental and starting with that self-reflective moment of where can I change? Where can I serve my family? Where can I grow? Because that's the beauty of family, right, Dr. Chapman? I mean, we're all
Yeah.
walking in our own personal journeys with the Lord, Lord willing, and he's refining us and he's perfecting our faith as we go, and we do that together rather than separately. And that's what's encouraging to me. I feel like, and I want you to speak to this as we're closing out our conversation, we can come into this with a real lack of hope, understanding the reality of broken families all across our nation and our world. But really, when you start small and you work through it incrementally, there is hope for not only healthy families, but restoration of those that had not been in that healthy place. How else would you speak to that?
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I think sometimes we get overwhelmed with the reality that there's so many things wrong, not only in the world, but in our family, that I just don't see how it can ever get better. And I understand those
Right.
feelings, like I understand that. But don't allow your feelings to control your behavior. Even though you may feel like there's no hope, ask God to show you one step that could be taken that might make that little part of the relationship and the family better. And just one by
Yeah.
one, you begin to make changes. The scriptures say, if you lack wisdom, ask God, and He gives wisdom. You don't have to beg Him. He wants to give you wisdom. And often He does it
Right.
through a sermon you hear on Sunday or through a book that you're reading or something, but God will begin to show you little things you can begin to do to make a difference. And it's one by one by one. And you wake up one day and realize, ooh, we're a lot better off than we were a year ago, you know? So, and we're either growing, it's not, I don't ever talk about a perfect family. I talk about a
Yeah,
growing family. We're either
that's
growing,
good.
that is, we're getting better, or we're regressing, we're getting worse. We never stand still. So let's put our
Yeah.
energy in trying to make things better than yielding to our emotions and kind of giving up and making things worse.
Yes, absolutely. As you're talking about that, I have to bring this back into our conversation, Dr. Chapman, because I have such a heart and passion for it. But thinking about children specifically in foster care who are there because they have not experienced healthy families. And so I would challenge any of our listeners today, and I believe that you would champion this alongside me, that if you have the opportunity and the Lord is speaking to your heart about welcoming children from broken homes into yours so that you have that opportunity to model healthy families for them. I stand here and tell you that I have seen the impact of children who don't know what to do when they see a family sitting around a meal table and just enjoying conversation together, or they don't know what to do with a husband and a wife who are affectionate and respectful towards one another. And so that's just something I want to challenge. And Dr. Chapman, you can speak to this as well if you would like to, but and especially talking about that giving back, that service component, that's a way
Yeah.
that you can serve is by modeling a healthy family relationship for children who don't have that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tremendous impact on a child's life when they are in a home where they see mom and dad loving each other, loving the children, loving them, even though they've now come into the family and they're part of this family right now. And then your children see you doing that for those other children, and they realize that you're doing it because you love that child, and you want to be
Yeah.
God's instrument for helping them take positive steps in their life. So yeah, it's a very positive thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Listeners, if you've got any questions about that, this is what I do every day. And so please feel free to reach out to me. I'll have a link in today's show notes if you would like to ask more questions about how your family can serve other children and model healthy families. But I also want to make sure that you can walk away with Dr. Chapman's latest resource, 5 Traits of a Healthy Family. Dr. Chapman, how can they do that? And how can they further connect with you?
They can, of course, get the book on Amazon, but they can also go to the website fivelovelanguages.com. The number fivelovelanguages.com, and they can get a little blurb on all my books, including that one. And they can also purchase them there if they choose to do so.
Wonderful. Listeners, I'll have that link in today's show notes. And Dr. Chapman, I am just so grateful for your work and all that you do to serve families and marriages. And so it has just been an honor and a privilege to meet you and to hear your wisdom shared. Thank you so much for all that you do. And thank you for being my guest today.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed being with you, and I just want to encourage you to keep on doing what you're doing because you never know what one podcast can touch a person's life and make a difference forever. So keep up the good work.
Thank you so much for listening to Called to Love today. I love to hear from listeners, and so I would love to connect with you to hear your stories and answer your questions right here on the show. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, send me a direct message, or send me an email at the link in today's show notes. I pray you have been encouraged by today's episode to walk in faith and continue to embrace your own call to love. Until next time, blessings, sweet friends.